We're going to be discussing Ahithophel today, his rise and demise. Ahithophel is the head counselor of David, and in 1 Chronicles 27:33, in those verses, it lists who the leaders of Israel are. And Ahithophel is named the king's counselor, and Hushai the Archite was the king's companion, or the king's friend. Both of them were advisors to David, leaders in Israel. I did as much research as I had time for, I guess, and I was not able to find any history about Ahithophel, like his parents, his lineage, any stories about when he was a kid. This time he is a great-grandfather, so I'm assuming he's late 70s, 80s, somewhere about that time in his life. He's from the town of Gilo, which is in between Hebron and Jerusalem. So Jerusalem's up here, Hebron's down here. It's about 3 or 4 miles up in this area, probably more in the peak of the mountains. It's a very hilly town, and that's where he's from. And when Absalom declares himself king in Hebron, Ahithophel's at home, and then he journeys down to Hebron to be with Absalom. In 2 Samuel 23, we have the list of Israel's mighty men. There's 37 men listed that are the mighty warriors and leaders in Israel. And I didn't notice this before, maybe because the name Ahithophel was not standing out to me. But he has a son named Eliam, who's one of the 37 mighty men. And so I missed that. And the other thing I missed is in 2 Samuel 11, David sees this beautiful woman, and he's like, who is that? And it says, and David sent and inquired about the woman, and someone said, is that not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? So when you know that Eliam was one of the 37 mighty men of Israel, that puts a whole different take on that verse. It's like, isn't that not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, one of your main soldiers, one of the mighty men that fights for you, who's married to another of your mighty men, Uriah? And so, from what I understand about people that serve in the military, they become bands of brothers. There's a bond that is developed in war that is unlike anything else that you have. And so these two men probably really had a lot of respect for each other. Maybe they're best friends. Maybe they weren't. They probably were. That's why Bathsheba was married to Uriah, was because Eliam thought he was worthy of his daughter. And so we kind of think that there's more to the story, obviously, than we're told. And so I've read that verse and that third verse a number of times, and it never stood out, or I never thought about looking to see who Eliam is. I just figured it was somebody in the Bible, but David knew, but there was no history. But now it makes a lot more sense. And the other thing that really stands out about Ahithophel is that his word is like the oracle of God. So he is very close to God. And when he speaks, his word is considered gospel, as if God himself is speaking through Ahithophel. That's his reputation. And so when we have our Bible and we see something in black and white or in red and white, as the case may be, we just believe it. And if we get a verse that's very clear-cut, you must be born again. The Bible says that. Jesus spoke those words, so we believe it. And we talk about being born again and the need for being born again. Because it's very clear in the Bible, Jesus says you must be. Well, Ahithophel had that kind of reputation. His words were certain, they were complete, and they were unquestionable. He had risen to a state of influence over all the nation and advised David very well. I did not see anything about him being a counselor of Saul. He's old enough that he could have been. I'm thinking David is about 60 at this time, early 60s, so he'd been king for just over 30 years. And so I don't know the history of Ahithophel, but he definitely had risen up and was the chief advisor for David. And so back in 2 Samuel 15, if you want to go back with me, 11th verse, Absalom's declaring himself king. And so It says, and with Absalom went 200 men invited from Jerusalem, and they went along innocently and did not know anything. So Absalom has got leave from David to go down to Hebron to sacrifice, and with him he takes 200 men with him. And it says, then Absalom sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city, from Gilo, while he offered sacrifices. And the conspiracy grew strong, for the people with Absalom continually increased in number. So I didn't think about this so much before, but the more I studied Ahithophel, it's like, why did Absalom call for him? He was David's chief advisor. My thought would be that Ahithophel would be loyal to David, and that Absalom would be a usurper, and that Ahithophel wouldn't want to go be with Absalom. We wouldn't want to go down there. But Absalom sends for Ahithophel. Ahithophel goes. So now I'm thinking there's got to be more behind the story. Was Ahithophel part of the conspiracy? Is he somebody that's been advising Absalom? That 4 years when Absalom was out in front of the city of Jerusalem, talking with the people as they came to the city for judgment, was Ahithophel in the background telling him, you should be king. You're the prized son. David is old. His time is washed up. Was he part of the plan? Was he part of this whole, everything going on with Absalom going down to Hebron and setting up his kingdom? And then when it was time, Absalom sent for him, so he goes down there to be Absalom's advisors. The more I thought about it, the more I thought that's probably the case. He probably was already in league with Absalom and went down there and just was making his plan fulfilled. So why would he want to do that? Well, his granddaughter is Bathsheba. And Bathsheba, her husband was killed. David takes her and marries her. Is there some kind of hatred that's been brewing since that happened? At this point, it's probably 10 to 15 years since that happened. David dies when he's 70, so Solomon takes over. And some people think he was 12, some people say 15, some people say 20. So it depends on what age you think Solomon was when he took over and kind of count back. So this could have been not long after, if Solomon was 12, this could be not long after Bathsheba was taken by David. So I don't know if there's something with that. There could also be, he saw a future in someone younger. Maybe he thought God's judgment was upon David and his house, and he wanted to start over. And it could be something as simple as he knew Absalom was easier to control. All you have to do is feed Absalom's pride, and Absalom's going to do what you want. So there could be something along that. All right, so let's look at these verses here, chapter 16, 15 through 19. Meanwhile, Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with him. And so it was when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, that Hushai said to Absalom, long live the king, long live the king. So Absalom said to Hushai, is this your loyalty to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend? And Hushai said to Absalom, no, but whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel chose, his I will be, and with him I will remain. Furthermore, whom should I serve? Should I not serve in the presence of his son? As I served in your father's presence, so I will be in your presence. And so Absalom and all the men that are with him travel to Jerusalem. David's gone, the soldiers are gone, the house is empty. David leaves 10 concubines to take care of the house. Imagine how big it is. That needs 10 people to clean it and keep it managed. But he does. He leaves 10. But that's it. Everything else is empty. Big parts of the city are empty where different people lived. Soldiers. Joab lived, and all these. Their families and everybody had gone. And so Absalom makes this journey without fear of battle. He just travels up the 7-8 miles and goes in Jerusalem and walks in, and Ahithophel's with him. And when Ahithophel advises him later, in the next chapter, about going to battle with David, Ahithophel says, let me grab 12,000 men, and we'll go march on David tonight. So That's a huge group of people that are traveling from Hebron with Absalom, that Ahithophel could go out and get 12,000 soldiers. This wasn't just a few hundred. This was thousands and thousands of people that were traveling with Absalom. So they arrive, they go into the city, and Absalom moves into David's house. Everybody finds their own house wherever they wanted to live, like Joab and whoever else went with David. They just moved in, they took over. And Hushai, who had been traveling, he was up in his city, met David on top of Mount of Olives, and now under David's leadership is going down to Jerusalem. So he arrives just after Absalom sets up his house. And that's what we read about. He goes there and he proclaims that he wants to be a servant of Absalom. As he advised David in his presence that he wanted to now do that. And he builds Absalom up. He says, why wouldn't I serve the one that God has chose? Why wouldn't I serve the one that Israel and all these people have chose? He just builds Absalom up in his pride. And Absalom had such an easy time taking Jerusalem because David left, that I'm sure in Absalom's mind, he was like, this is definitely God's will. God has opened the door for me just to walk in and become king in Jerusalem. And so he's just completely full of himself. And all of his advisors now and his soldiers, how easy was this? God must be with us. And so it just feeds into his pride. And so Hushai's words he just loves him. And so he's like, yes, I want you to be my advisor. That makes perfect sense. You need to be with me here. And so Hushai becomes one of his advisors. In the next few verses, it says, then Absalom said to Ahithophel, give advice as to what we should do. So he set up the king, he sat up on his throne. He's like, I'm king now, what should I do? What should be our first priority? Should I go pursue David? Should I declare a truce with David? Should I try to seek peace? Should I go battle against the Philistines? Should I go invade another country? His mind, I'm sure, is on his dad, but what is it I should do? Give me some advice. And Ahithophel said to Absalom, go in to your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep his house. And all Israel will hear that you are abhorred by your father. Then the hands of all who are with you will be strong. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on top of the house, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all of Israel. So Ahithophel's advice is for Absalom to go into David's concubines, declaring kind of an absolute war, drawing a line in the sand that can be unforgiven by David, that would be abhorred by all the people that follow David, that Absalom would go into his concubines. It's just something it's the biggest act of defiance that he could do beyond everything he's already done. It's kind of like sealing the deal that he no longer had any loyalty to his dad, had no promise, no offer of peace. It's like, you are my ultimate enemy, and there can be no reconciliation. And that's what Ahithophel advised him right off the bat. Create a further divide. And it's another reason why I think Ahithophel may have been the mastermind behind all these things that are going on. He wanted this divide to be certain. And he says, if you do this, the hands of your own servants will be strengthened. They'll see how powerful and mighty you are, that you have no fear, and that you are now king, absolute, that there's no going back. And of course, this filled Absalom with more pride. And not only would he do it and have it rumored that he went in, but they built a tent on top of the house. So that flat part of the roof that David was walking around on when he saw Bathsheba, I'm guessing that's where they built the tent. And they put it up high enough so everybody could see, and then they decorated it, and they had the concubines go in, probably just very formally, maybe announced it, maybe trumpets were blowing. But this was a public sight. This was a public spectacle. So they would have done everything they could to draw attention to it because Absalom was making a point. And so he goes in and then he walks into them and he spends the night or maybe just starts living with the concubines in the evening and nights. This act of defiance. But he wanted it to be public. Ahithophel wanted it to be public. So there could be no reconciliation with David. And so David's soldiers would be even more angry and cut off from Absalom. So he builds this tent. So when I thought about this, you think back to after David took Bathsheba, Nathan comes to visit him and tells him the story about the man who killed the poor man's sheep, only sheep. And David becomes enraged and pronounces judgment upon him. And then Nathan says, "Thou art the man." And what he says to David back in 2 Samuel 12, verse 10, "Now therefore, the sword shall never depart from your house." This is Nathan's judgment, God's judgment upon David. "Because you have despised me and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up adversity against you from your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of the sun. For you did this secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel, before the sun." In other words, not at night, not hidden anyway, out in the sun, out in the sight, so everybody could see. And so what Nathan has proclaimed is coming to pass. His own member of his own house, his own son, has now taken his concubines, and with this spectacle in front of all of Israel, part of the sword not departing from his house. And so this is being fulfilled, as Nathan said. God's judgment, is always true. All right, so we're going to go on the first 4 verses. And so what happens in this chapter, I'll just go ahead and summarize it, is right away, the decision has to be made about what to do about David and his army. And I've studied the books of Samuel many times in my life, in Sunday school lessons, and I've heard sermons on it. And for some reason, when I think about Absalom's rebellion, I always thought it was for years, like maybe 2-3 years. But it's over really quick. I mean, Ahithophel's advice is go tonight. They move in, Hushai shows up, and he's like, immediately, let's go tonight. So it'd only been a couple days. David still hasn't got to the River Jordan, which is only 40 miles from Jerusalem. And if you're running for your life, it doesn't take that long to make 40 miles, even though you're traveling with kids. They should still be able to do that in a few days. So it's all happening really quick. I mean, everything's just like falling into place. So they have to decide what they're going to do about David. And so we have Ahithophel give him advice, and Hushai give him advice. And what happens is that Hushai, it doesn't appear that he goes into the room when Ahithophel gives his advice, but then he hears about it, and he goes through and he tells Absalom, Ahithophel's advice is not good. That's just bad advice. He says, what you need to do is send out through all of Israel and build up an army. Go from the north all the way to the south and have people, soldiers come to you, and then you lead an army to go out after David. Don't wait. Don't worry about waiting, because we know what a great warrior your dad is. And we know these mighty men that went with him. And if you take what you have now after him, you're going to be defeated, and it's going to be, you'll be a laughingstock. So gather an army. And that gives David time to go farther. And it gives Hushai time to send word to David about what the plan is. We'll talk about that next time. But Ahithophel's advice is not taken. And so what I'm going to do is just kind of close with him. If we go down to verse 23, when he realizes his advice not taken, and I don't know exactly what's going through his mind. I think he knows Hushai's advice is bad and will lead to Absalom's destruction. I think he feels that the Spirit of God has left him. His influence is now gone. He's not speaking as the oracle of God, because Hushai gives advice that says Ahithophel's advice is bad, and everybody, Absalom and all of his other men, say, oh, we want to do what Hushai said. So he's lost prestige, he's lost power, he probably doesn't feel the Spirit of God with him, and he knows the gig's up. So in the 23rd verse it says, now Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed, He saddled on a donkey and arose and went home to his house, to his city. Then he put his house in order and hanged himself, and he died, and he was buried in his father's tomb. He died a cursed death. He died on a tree. He hanged himself, a very fitting death. I got a slide for that. But Deuteronomy 21 says, if a man has committed a crime punishable by death, and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night on the tree, but you shall bury him the same day, for a hanged man is cursed by God. This is a worthy death of Ahithophel, someone who defied God's will for whatever reason, whether it was power or wealth or influence, whatever it was, he chose his own plan rather than God's plan. And he fittingly died that way. Christ dies on a tree, symbolizing the curse that had been put upon him. He died under the curse of our sins on a tree. What's interesting is when you look at David and all the things that happened, how much ties in as a type of Christ. Christ had a good friend, one of the 12, who followed him from the beginning. And I believe did miracles, baptized, did everything that the other apostles were doing. But he betrayed Christ for 30 pieces of silver. And whatever influence he thought he might gain from the high priest and the Sanhedrin council, whatever reason he did it, he regretted it. And the Bible says in Matthew 27:5, he went out and hanged himself on a tree. Hanged himself, he says he threw down the pieces of silver in his temple and departed and went and hanged himself. But he died a cursed death. He died hanging on a tree. The betrayer of David, his counselor, his friend, hung himself on a tree. There's a very strong tie there. And just to kind of close with the same thought, Absalom, the other part to this betrayer, the man of his own house, and he's riding along, and he ducks underneath the branch of a tree, and his beautiful hair gets stuck in the tree, and he's hung there suspended. And some soldiers come and tell Joab, he's over there in a tree. So Joab, he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through Absalom's heart, and while he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree. And 10 young men who bore Joab's armor surrounded Absalom and struck and killed him. I think these things were happening at the same time, not one than the other. Absalom is hung in a tree, and he dies in a tree. He also dies a cursed death, the betrayer of the king, betrayer of David. And here's a picture that there's a lot of artwork that's been done about this. You think about the manger and all these other things, the biblical things. This is actually something that there's a lot of artwork been done, and this is a picture from 1899. So God's purpose always happens. God's will always happens. Luke 1 says, for no word from God will ever fail. Isaiah 48, the grass withers and the flowers fell, but the word of our God stands forever. God's purpose is going to happen, no matter what other people try to do to prevent it. His will is certain, and what he wants is going to take place. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Please do me a favor and like the video, share it with someone who will enjoy it, and subscribe to the channel. God bless.